The purpose of this video is to help assessors determine if a maple forest tap for sap collection qualifies for use value classification. What we're going to cover is how to inspect a forest to determine if sufficient maple stands exist for tapping, the qualifying industry standards and what to look for when you do your field inspection, and how to classify and value eligible operations. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of the sap collection process, industry standards, and how to accurately assess these operations. Let's talk about when to inspect a forest. The time of your inspection is nearly as important as the inspection itself. The best time to inspect the operation is during the harvest or production season, which includes February, March, or April of the year before the next January assessment date. For example, for a 2013 assessment, verify maple sap production records no later than April of 2012. Make an inspection of the forest in question for the initial evaluation of an operation. Schedule your inspection when the actual tapping is being done. Do not accept photographs for proof of land use. You must inspect the forest in person to verify the claim. Other times you should inspect a maple forest are when you receive a claim initially at open book. Do not hesitate to inspect that property immediately. If a claim is brought to the Board of Review, the owner must make a compelling argument and provide evidence that their land meets industry standards. If the owner successfully makes this argument to the board, the assessor should make all necessary and applicable classification, value, and error changes. This includes furnishing the use values adjusted to the level of assessment so that that clerk can calculate and enter the corrected assessment. Remind the Board of Review that they must act on the testimony in front of them, regardless of how well they might know that property. When inspecting the property, look for a number of indicators. The main indicators include taps and trees per acre, visible tap marks, and a road or path to get to the collection sites. Also look for tree management. For example, spacing and thinning. You should see a clear understory and brushes removed. Tree species. Assessors should look for and recognize a predominance of maples. A property that is predominantly oak does not typically contain enough maple trees to meet eligibility requirements. Additional indicators to look for are line networks connecting trees to buckets or collection centers, a sugar shack with storage containers, firewood, and an evaporator or pan. The presence of a shack and equipment indicates the seriousness and dedication of the producer to make syrup. If a shack is not present, production is done elsewhere by someone else. Ask where this occurs. Any materials and equipment used for tapping, including taps, spigots on hand, number of buckets on sites or in storage, lines stored on site, drills, drill bits, barrels and buckets, connectors and wire, a burner, an evaporator, or a kettle. You should also say a filter, a defoamer or hydrometer, and something to draw off faucets and a stovepipe. Remember, the personal property will be exempt since the collection of maple sap is a farming operation. The structure, sugar shack, will be assessable. Retail operations directly related with sales of the product are assessed as commercial. Bottling operations are also assessed as commercial. You must ask for supporting information at the time of the inspection. Supporting information can include sales receipts, income tax information, permits and contracts or agreements, and membership in a professional organization such as the Wisconsin Maple Syrup Producers Organization. Production can be used as supporting information. For example, income from the operations and quantities of the product sold. When you interview the producer or the landowner, you may ask for documentation if the operations are in question. The landowner may rent his or her land to a producer and still meet the minimum requirements for use value classification. Assessors should understand that the producer must have actively gathered sap in the previous production year. Sap production should not be used to decide eligibility of the operation because results may vary. Evidence supporting the activity in the form of sales is helpful, while the absence of sales may be an indicator that the operation is a hobby for personal use. In these situations, the lack of retail or wholesale outlets is most likely not eligible for use value assessment. While production documentation is important to the operation's legitimacy, the taps per acre is the determining factor. Since maple sap gathering is a weather-dependent production, it is not an indicator of effort. Now let's talk about industry standards. The North American Industry Classification System Manual is our reference guide. To determine if a property qualifies for use value assessment in Wisconsin, use this guide. It defines industry standards for tree sap collection. Now let's look at the industry standards for tree size, taps per tree, taps per acre, trees per acre. Again, tree size is one of the main factors used to determine eligibility. Tree size is the diameter of the trunk at the breast height, or DBH. To get diameter, measure circumference and divide by 3.14. For example, this tree has a circumference of 35.5 inches. Divide 35.5 by 3.14 to determine that the diameter of the tree is 11.3 inches. A tree with an 18-inch or larger diameter is considered a large tree. There are two common tree stand types: large, well-established trees and smaller, younger stands. The industry standard for larger trees is 3 taps per tree. The industry standard is a minimum 35 taps per acre in a well-established grove. Well-established maple groves tend to have fewer but larger trees. Smaller, younger trees only support 1 tap each and grow closer together. Remember, they require a minimum of 50 taps per acre to qualify. The producer must give you evidence of the number of taps per tree. Installing more taps per tree meeting industry standards for diameter is acceptable. Therefore, a 24-inch tree may have up to 3 taps. The producer must give you evidence of the number of taps per acre for the stand type. The producer must give you evidence that there are a minimum of 50 taps per acre for a small stand type. The number of taps per tree versus the size and number of trees per acre must follow industry standards. It is possible that the producer does not meet a per acre minimum for taps, yet cumulatively the taps per acre meet industry standards. Remember, it is the assessor's responsibility to verify the number of trees being tapped. So what are the minimum requirements? The number of trees tapped in a given area needs to be extensive enough such that the acreage is considered primarily engaged in maple sap gathering. This is the basis of use value eligibility in Wisconsin. To determine taps per acre, look at the tree's diameter, taps per tree, and taps per acre all at the same time. Total taps, not the number of trees, is what matters. Divide the number of taps by the total acres. It needs to equal at least 35 per acre. Anything less is not use value eligible. Trees per acre. So to determine the minimum number of taps per acre, you must look at the standard number of trees per acre and the diameter of the trees per acre. Let's look at the standard number of trees per acre. The number of trees per acre is based on the diameter of the trees. There will be multiple taps on a tree if it has a larger diameter. So, how does an assessor measure the diameter and the number of trees per acre? First, you need to know how to measure the tree spacing. Use a measuring wheel to do a transect survey of the area. Measure out a distance approximately 208 lineal feet in two directions from one point. This creates the base and one side of the square of 1 acre that composes 43,560 square feet. In this area, count the number of trees in transect, 30 feet wide along 208 lineal feet. For a small stand type, you should find a minimum of 7 trees in this transect. The industry standard for a small stand type is 1 tap per tree. 7 trees times 1 tap each means you should find a minimum of 7 taps in this sample. Because our transect is 1/7 of an acre, we multiply the number of taps in the transect by 7 to estimate the total number of taps in that acre. Therefore, if you discover only 5 trees in your transect of a large stand, multiply 7 times 5 for a total of 35 trees per acre. Remember, the larger the diameter, the more taps there should be. These 5 trees should have 2 or 3 taps each, depending on the diameter. So multiply that number by the number of trees to find the estimated number of taps per acre. For example, you have a 40-acre property with a stand of large trees. 26 of the acres are tapped. You find an average of 32 taps per acre for a total of 832 taps. 832 is divided by 35, the industry standard. This indicates 23.77 acres are eligible for a use value assessment. Remember, the larger the diameter, the more taps there should be. Trees more than 24 inches in diameter support at least 3 taps per tree. The assessor should identify large diameter trees and the impact they have on the number of taps per acre. So, how are managed forest land MFL acres under a DNR contract impacted by a maple sap operation? If the MFL property in whole or in part qualifies for use value assessment as maple sap collection, the assessor must assign a use value to the property. The property is taxed at the MFL rate and the maple sap gathering has no effective impact on the property. How does the assessor classify the remainder of the property as agricultural forest? Simply, the assessor can apply an agricultural forest classification to ineligible maple forest acres. For example, the owner actively taps 26 of the 40 forested eligible acres. The remaining 14 acres is not eligible since the tree species is not viable for sap production. This remaining 14 acres is then classified as agricultural forest and assessed at 50% of market value, adjusted to the level of assessment. So what lands aren't eligible? The number of trees tapped in a given area needs to be extensive enough so the acreage is considered primarily engaged in maple sap gathering. You must identify any ineligible lands that are not producing maple sap or not capable of producing maple sap. Some examples are where landowners who don't meet the minimum total standard number of taps per acre annually for the entire parcel don't qualify for use value assessment. Forests that don't meet the standard density size and taps per acre are not eligible. For example, in your transect survey, you discover an old-growth maple forest which shows signs of 20 taps per acre over the transect area. That property is not eligible. The minimum is 35. Cumulative taps per acre for the entire parcel may suggest eligibility for a select number of acres, yet the acres surveyed do not. In this example, it is the owner's responsibility to provide evidence that all the acres meet industry standards. As an assessor, it is your responsibility to discover the land use, not prove the case for the property owner. That is their responsibility. Assessing the property. Review your county soil maps for the parcel and apply the grade accordingly. Take into consideration that forested lands are composed of various soil types. Not all forested land is grade 3 or pasture. Make sure to review all classifications of wooded property when maple sap collection is made. You will likely see a variety of classifications on these parcels since a higher degree of scrutiny is used to establish use value classification on maple forests. Be diligent and use County Web GIS applications. Review air photos of the site before inspections and look for classification distinctions present on these air photos. Undeveloped classifications such as swamps and areas subject to inundation often accompany maple forest in any part of the state. Assessors should understand that gathering maple sap to create syrup is a labor of love for producers. Tapping maple trees is not an easy task and takes a lot of effort to establish an operation and receive a use value classification determination. The assessor should be prepared to initially spend considerable time to discover the validity of the operation. This time spent upfront will be reduced in future years as the operation continues to flourish or expand. Visit our website, revenue.wi.gov, to learn more.